What does it actually look like when a 17th century visionary sits down and writes a highly detailed, minute-by-minute chronicle of the Virgin Mary's final days? Well, welcome to another explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly unique historical and theological artifact, Venerable Mary of Agrada's visionary text, the Mystical City of God. We're going to dive right into this text to see exactly how she captured these final, mysterious moments. It's a highly structured, intense account that boldly blends history, theology, and deep mystical devotion all into one.
So, the overarching question we're exploring today is simple but pretty profound. How did a 17th century nun envision the final secret days of the Virgin Mary? Now, this text explicitly claims to record direct mystical visions. So throughout this explainer, we're going to impartially explore this fascinating narrative exactly as the author described it. We aren't here to debate the theology, but rather to really understand the profound structure and the incredibly specific details that Mary of Agreda laid out for her readers. Let's get into it.
The author actually organizes the climax of Mary's earthly life into a very clear three-day timeline. Day 1 focuses on the transition. Day 2 covers the miraculous burial and the wait. And finally, Day 3 brings the resurrection and assumption. This chronological structure is really the absolute backbone of the whole narrative we're about to explore.
Okay, picture this. According to the text, this stage is set 3 days before Mary's passing. The author writes that the apostles and disciples were miraculously transported by angels from all across the remote regions of the world to gather at the cenacle in Jerusalem. It's a hugely dramatic scene. St. Peter, for example, is described as being carried by an angel all the way from Rome just to be present. Talk about a miraculous first-class flight, right? The text paints this picture of intense sorrow among the apostles as they suddenly realize they've been brought together to witness the departure of their queen and mother.
Now here is where the text presents a really profound theological choice. The author asserts that Mary, being completely free from original sin, was technically exempt from the punishment of death. She actually had the option of an immediate, instant transition to heaven. Yet she freely chose to undergo a natural death. Why? Well, it was to perfectly imitate her son, Christ. She wanted to follow him in death exactly as she had in life.
You can hear the reasoning in this direct quote from the source, which illustrates exactly how the author frames Mary's deliberate decision. The text records Mary saying, "Since I had seen my son and true God die, I would not have satisfied the love at him if I had refused death." It's an incredibly powerful moment in the narrative, honestly, because it completely transforms her passing from just an inevitable biological event into this deliberate, supreme act of love and sacrifice.
And the author gets incredibly, almost surprisingly specific about the timeline here. The text notes Mary was exactly 70 years minus 26 days old. Furthermore, she passed away at exactly 3 p.m. on a Friday, which perfectly mirrors the exact hour and day of Christ's death. But here is the most striking detail from the source. She didn't die of old age or illness. No, the text claims she passed away from the sheer physical force of divine love, which literally consumed her earthly existence the moment miraculous divine assistance was withdrawn.
So after her passing, the narrative moves to the burial. St. Peter and St. John were tasked with moving her body. And the text notes a fascinating detail here. Her body was remarkably weightless. I mean, they felt no more weight than that of her tunic. Plus, it emitted this brilliant, blinding effulgence. They placed her on a bier to be carried in a grand, orderly procession right out of the city of Jerusalem to a new, mysteriously prepared sepulchre in the valley of Josaphat.
This really illustrates the sheer scale of the supernatural phenomena that the author claims accompanied this procession. It was off the charts. The sick were instantly cured. Demons literally fled from the possessed because they couldn't even stand to be near the procession. Onlookers converted en masse. Furthermore, a sweet, heavenly fragrance completely filled the air, while candles brought by the faithful burned continuously for 3 days without ever melting or being consumed.
Once they finally reached the valley of Josaphat, Peter and John reverently placed her in the sepulchre and sealed it up with a large stone. For the next 3 days, the apostles waited in tender sorrow. But they weren't alone. The text describes an invisible, celestial choir of 1,000 angels standing guard over the sealed tomb, and they were singing heavenly music that the apostles could actually hear. This music served as a comforting, miraculous signal in the quiet of their long watch.
The text dictates that on the third day, the celestial music suddenly ceased. At an hour just after midnight, Christ descended from heaven, but he didn't come alone. He was accompanied by a massive multitude of ancient saints and patriarchs, specifically including Adam, Eve, and Saint Joseph.
It's framed as this massive, cosmic event, bringing humanity's earliest ancestors down to witness the absolute culmination of Mary's earthly journey.
So, how does the resurrection actually happen? The source maps out the exact mechanics of this miraculous event in 3 distinct steps. First, Mary's purest soul re-enters the body. Second, the body is instantly reanimated with immortal glory, endowed with gifts of clearness, impassibility, agility, and subtlety. But the third step is arguably the most striking. Mary ascends to heaven by passing right through the solid stone grave and her burial tunic, completely undisturbed. Honestly, it's almost sci-fi in its execution.
Following her bodily assumption, a magnificent procession moves straight up through the air to the Empyrean heaven, which is the absolute highest spiritual realm. Mary arrives at the very throne of the Holy Trinity. The text describes this intensely glorious reception, where she's embraced by the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and is officially crowned as the supreme queen and lady of all creation, placed at a supereminent rank above literally all angels and saints.
While describing her glorified state in heaven, the text includes a highly specific, really beautiful detail. Visible right over Mary's heart was a small, refulgent globe, resembling a monstrance used to display the communion wafer. According to the text, this was a specific, eternal reward granted to her for having been the perfect sanctuary for the sacramental word and for having received the Holy Communion with absolute, flawless perfection during her earthly life.
So what does this new cosmic role actually look like? The author strictly categorizes her absolute dominion over 3 distinct realms. First, she is named Empress of Hell, with the immense power to subject demons. Second, she is the protectress of the militant church, actively defending the faithful. And finally, she is the treasurer of grace, holding the position as the sole distributor of divine blessings. The text claims absolutely nothing is given to the world that doesn't first pass through her hands. The author records this exact decree as coming directly from the voice of the Trinity itself. By explicitly calling her the advocate and protectress, the text presents a theological framework where everyday mortals have a direct, infinitely powerful ally standing right at the right hand of God, ready to dispense grace to those who call upon her, especially at the hour of their death. Now, here is where the whole text pulls a fascinating pivot. Throughout this rich historical and theological recounting, at the end of every single chapter, it shifts to a dual narrative. It moves from a historical chronicle right into direct mystical instruction. The Virgin Mary starts speaking directly to the author, Sister Mary of Agreda, in sections titled Words of the Queen. In these passages, the text pivots to offering very strict, incredibly demanding spiritual advice aimed directly at the author's own life.
A huge recurring theme in these lessons is detachment, which is defined as the act of freeing the heart from earthly love, visible things, and passions. I mean, think about your own attachments for a second. It's definitely not an easy thing to do. The narrative leverages Mary's own life of perfect poverty and detachment as the ultimate blueprint here. The text demands that the author completely abandon worldly pursuits and focus entirely on the eternal. We see this vividly in this quote, "It is time that thou die to the visible things, and that thy body be buried in thy self-knowledge." This proves that the mystical city of God isn't just meant to be a historical timeline of miracles to passively read. No, it is an intense piece of visionary instructional literature. The author is using this grand cosmic narrative of Mary's death and assumption as a direct mirror to challenge and reform the reader's own spiritual life and earthly attachments.
We've explored the highly structured timeline and really rigorous spiritual demands of this unique text today, and I think it leaves us with a pretty compelling question. How do 17th century visions like this challenge our modern, rigid lines between history, theology, and personal revelation? It forces us to remember that for mystics like Mary of Agreda, these weren't just stories to be read, they were absolute realities to be lived. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the pages.